Greetings, good teachers. I'm glad to welcome you to Module 7.5. And what is this? Point 5? Yes, this is an added module from when we originally designed the curriculum in the PhD program about 8 years ago at its inception. And we've added it because we're getting more and more teaching about something called the science of reading. And of course, the components of a science of reading are covered in this course because it's a holistic course that looks at all the ways that kids learn, and phonics would be one of them. So the science of reading is a new name for something very, very old, phonics. And I'd like to share with you just a few minutes, some comments and thoughts about it without going into the specifics, because now we have this book, Fact Checking the Science of Reading, that really gets into detail with David Pearson and Rob Tierney as the authors and gatherers of this. So let me share with you that when I became a teacher in the 1970s, yes, I'm ancient. I started off in kindergarten, but I think my third year I moved to fourth grade. And that's where I had a revolution come to me because I encountered a different type of literature. So as a classroom teacher, fourth graders were given something called a Basel reader. And a Basel reader was a collection of stories with skills attached to each story. So the kids would read a story and then they would do skills. And the skills it really was a balanced approach because they had comprehension skills, they had phonics skills, they had everything tied into the unit, and they had a master plan of how they would cover all the components of the reading process. And my Basel reader was by Scott Forsman, a very respected and renowned program at that time. But there was another stack of books, and it was called Sounds of Reading by Bill Martin Jr. I looked at those, and I noticed one thing immediately. They had amazing, breathtaking art because Bill Martin used real artists to do illustrations for his stories, where Scott Forsman just hired someone who wasn't an artist in real life. They didn't have a studio. They could do art, but they didn't really understand that art is a means to literacy in itself. The beautiful art that was in the sounds of language. So I pushed Scott Forsman aside, and I taught through the sounds of language and how amazing it was that kids could fall in love with reading by amazing stories that attracted them and helped them to read in a very holistic manner, because they came to the book from a meaning sense because it was a good story to read, and it was also had art that helped explain what the story was about. And so when I had a chance to get a PhD, I went to the University of Arizona because that's where the cutting ground work was being done in literacy. And even Rob Tierney, who's the author of this book, was one of my professors and one of my great professors there at the University of Arizona. They also had Ken Goodman, who was probably the father of the miscue understanding, because he had written a story when he was at Wayne State. It was an article in a research journal talking about how when readers are reading, they are reading from the script in their head and not from the words on the page, because readers take in text and they process it, and by the time you hear their voice, they're reading this mental script and not the script on the page, and that's why they sometimes improve it or make it personal, and those miscues are just signposts of understanding. And of course, the phonics lobby doesn't like that, because to them, the words are there and you're supposed to read those words. Hey, I'm an author. I know that when kids read my books, they interpret what I say and they have their own meaning. Rosenblatt called it the reader, the text, the poem, and this script that the kids make is their poem. It's a thing that's very beautiful. So what is science of reading? Is it new? No, because I can go back to my days in the 70s and the 80s in Texas. After I finished my PhD, I took a job at Texas A&M Commerce, and I was elected to be president of the State Reading Association, the Texas Association for the Improvement of Reading. And as president, I was invited to 30-something different universities to speak at the reading conferences. So it was a great opportunity for me to explore this great state of Texas, from the Rio Grande Valley to the pine forest and on the border of Louisiana. So it was an amazing experience. But one of the highlights of that year is that the governor appointed me to chair a committee to develop the new reading model for the state of Texas. And so I worked with 12 amazing teachers, experienced classroom teachers and university professors from around the state, And we came up with a really good statement about what reading is. And because Texas was a very diverse state with a Mexican American population, Latinos in almost half the state, where Spanish was the first language, we had a very diverse view and recognized that English was an additional language for many kids and not the first language. So we met twice with the governor. And by the way, his name was George Bush, future president of the United States, and in his office. And George Bush is very charismatic. He would slap you on the back and call you by his nickname. And it was a great experience. He just loved our model. And actually, I had just written a new book then called The Football That Won the Super Bowl, and I gave him a copy, and he put it in his library. And all was great until it wasn't. Because you see, those who believe in a phonics only model don't want kids to have access to any reading cues other than phonics. And so our model was very broad, and it recognized that some kids are very visual. They learn through the eyes. Some kids are very auditory. They learn through the ears. Even in my writing process with my co-author, Bill Martin Jr., and when we wrote our Halloween classic that's still in print today by Simon & Schuster called Trick or Treat, our strategy was I would look at it because I'm visual and read it, and Bill would listen to it, and he would say, that doesn't sound right, let's do this. And so we were a good team of someone who was auditory and someone who was visual. So obviously, I didn't learn to read word by word or letter by letter because I learned to read before school because my mother read to me and I knew the stories in my head, so I could pick up the book and I could think about the story and I would look at the words and the story came to me. So I was very visual. And we have kids like that, and we have kids who are very auditory that phonics works great for them. And so that's why we really want a balanced model of reading where many strategies come. And by the way, second language learners definitely need a multifaceted approach with many cueing systems to help them access a second language or an additional language of English. So everything was good until it wasn't, because a couple weeks later, I got a call that the committee had been dismissed and there was a new model of reading. And it was a simple phonics model, nothing else allowed, and no recognition of the diversity of the population of the state of Texas, and that half the population in the southern part of the state spoke Spanish as a first language. So I was upset about that, and I thought, who sold the governor this false goods? And I started daydreaming about it, and I came up with a metaphor, the old story, The Emperor's New Clothes, where the advisors told the emperor he had beautiful clothes, but he was actually naked. And so I wrote an editorial for our state reading journal called The Governor's New Clothes, and I went through carefully what had been sold to the governor and why he was naked, because he was missing what reading really is. Well, I almost got fired over that, but I have tenure, and since it was an editorial, I survived. But who would believe that here I am at St. John's University in New York City, and the governor here was sold the same thing. So she mandated something called the science of reading, because it was so logical. Yes, reading, it sounds, the words, you can pronounce the words with phonics. Just teach the kids phonics. Well, good teachers, you know it's not that simple, because when you can read, when I read down to the second floor, knock on Knocker Nicker's door, trick or treat, treat, says Knocker Nicker, as he fills my bag with candy bars. When I can read candy bars, already I can see how phonics works in candy bars. I can do it. But if you can't read it yet, it's much more complex. And we know that the rules of phonics show us that sometimes you can sound out a word, and because our English language, because the great vowel shift of the 17th century is not phonetically regular, you don't get the right sound. And so that's why throughout this course, as we looked at different models of reading, you see that readers bring their own understanding and background to text. And that's why when Ken Goodman wrote 3 Seconds of Reading and talked about miscue-analysis, he said that when a reader reads, they take the text into their mind, they process it, and they come up with their own script, and that's what they're reading when their voice comes out and the teacher is taking a running record, for example. And it's good because it means that they have their own interpretation of it. Hey, I'm a writer. I rejoice when a child claims my story and makes it their own, and if they change it to make it more beautiful or make sense to them, that's great. So anyway, that's where we are today. The science of reading is back with a new name. Okay, it's phonics. It's phonics only, and uh, I think this book has shown you so many false things that people that are advocates of science of reading claim, and it reveals those. It opens those up. But I'm not going to talk about that because you have the book to read this week, and it's very important that you do so and think about it. I don't want to say science of reading is a model of reading because I don't think it is, but it's something that is part of the broader science of reading, if we wanted to call it that, and that is that readers have different skills, so they come to reading in different ways. And so that's why it's very important that I want to spend time this week talking about reading as a craft, reading as an art, and not simply as a science. My problem, my beef with the science of reading is that they want to attack other models and only have their model. And they do it through politics. For example, I was speaking at the reading conference at Texas Women's University uh, in the spring of 2024, and a teacher came up to me and she said, I'm a high school literacy teacher, and I've been told that I can only teach phonics to my high school kids. I can't talk about rhythm and rhyme. I can't talk about the three cueing systems. Oh, by the way, the cueing systems are when readers read, they use semantic clues, they use syntactic clues or language clues, and yes, they use graphophonic clues, and that means that the graphs that you see that represent sounds, they use all of those. But she was told she couldn't do it. A bill had been passed outlawing, mentioning the semantic cueing system. That is just mind-boggling. But it takes me back to the early 1990s when this movement was growing strength under a different name. But I went to a conference. It was a conference, I think, in Fort Worth, Texas, and there was a session on beginning reading. And I went to it, and the presenter held up my colleague's book, Brown Bear, What Do You See?, and said, do not let kindergartners read this book. If they read this book, they won't learn true phonics. Because if they read that book, Brown Bear, What Do You See? I see a red bird looking at me, they'll look at the color red and the bird, and they'll be able to read red without sounding it out. And we can't let them do that. And so I was just shocked because that's exactly what you want to do. You want readers to have multiple cues. And that's why Brown Bear is such a great book for kindergarten. And by the way, behind me, you see Rainbow Bear, which is one of the sequels to Brown Bear that I did with Bill Martin Jr. And it has the same thing. It allows kids to come to reading with different cueing systems. And that allows them to be successful as readers on the first week of school. And that's what we're talking about. So, interesting week as we look at all these different attacks on balanced reading, if you want to call it that, holistic reading, if you want to call it that. But I want you to be aware, as someone earning a PhD, that reading is multifaceted and it's not one approach. One size does not fit all. It's very important that you read this book carefully and look at some of the attacks that are being made, such as my example of don't teach with Brown Bear, what do you see? So we can talk about that. I look forward to you're reading this and your comments and approaches, and so it should be very enlightening. And so I look forward to your thinking about it and thinking with Rob Tierney and Dave Pearson, because they say opening up the conversation is the subtitle. So have a great week and talk to you later. Bye-bye.